Hey there, and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete, and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Anomaly Sea Ice Challenge with the transhumanist Paragons of Pandroth. Last time we left off after a very eventful episode. Seriously, if you haven't watched it yet, go ahead and do so. It was pretty much constant action non-stop. We went out to destroy a climate adjuster, then had one dropped right on top of us as part of a mech cluster. We called in Shamblers, we called in Fleshbeasts, had more appear from the pit gate, which we then also unintentionally destroyed by dumping too much toxic waste down into it, and the twisted obelisk also finally sprung into action and gave Ellie a flesh mass lung. Not necessarily a bad mutation, but certainly a bit concerning that the obelisk can do this. Now, to get things started today, we improve our slave quarters a bit. I think it's time for a second fabrication bench, so that we don't clog up the one we have with all bills for components and bionic body parts. This way, our slaves can now handle the component production, while our colonists can focus on transhumanizing themselves. The entire process is then suddenly interrupted by Ben, the latest addition to our colony, who lets out a shrieking howl and turns hostile. Looks like we finally found the downside to his mysterious dead life dust ability, and it probably also means that his future with this colony has come to an end, at least in the official colonist capacity. The most I could see for him at this point would be a stone-cutting slave. Unfortunately, Midnight and Jay have something to say about that, and the two of them kill Ben outright, and so we lose a pawn, but most likely one of the less useful ones. By now, we also know which entities are attracted by shrieking howls, and so the arrival of a small group of visitors here is rather untimely. It will likely only take a few seconds for these three to meet their doom. And indeed, here they are, Sightstealers, and probably quite a lot of them. Now, luckily, at least one of the visitors manages to flee here, but of course we have no desire to find out ourselves exactly how many of these creatures have wandered in, so let's have Lauren make use of the recently constructed mech band antenna to summon our very first War Queen. This first summon will be a relatively weak group, and the antenna will also be destroyed in the process. It is a one-use item that needs to be rebuilt every time we want to summon another War Queen. Our lifter bots, meanwhile, are sadly getting themselves caught outside the base, but we're not going to risk anything to save them. Instead, while we wait for the mechs, we quickly send Ellie over to the comms console to make a deal with an exotic goods trader. And it is quite the exchange. We are selling components, a duplicate gene pack, and all of our thrombo horns to acquire a death rest capacity serum and a gene pack that I think our transhumanist folks would love. It includes ageless, great crafting, and mild cell instability, which essentially translates into a higher cancer risk, but our medical expertise and our ability to manufacture new body parts should make that a manageable risk. Finally then, the mechs arrive, including the War Queen. This is an absolute tank, extremely durable, but not really all that dangerous offensively, at least not directly. Instead, you can see it here, the War Queen carries 600 units of steel, and will use these to manufacture war urchins, small mechs that are essentially even weaker versions of the Militar, short range, not very durable, but she can deploy them in great numbers. Whether or not that's going to be enough to win here, that remains to be seen, considering that being swamped by melee units is probably the biggest weakness of any mech unit in the game. I have a feeling that this might be a win for the Sightstealers. Just like the Diabolus, by the way, the War Queen will drop a special chip upon death, and honestly, it looks like her death will be the inevitable outcome of this fight here. In any case, that chip is more powerful than the signal chip from the Diabolus, and thus used in the creation of more powerful equipment, although the first one here will need to be used to unlock the next level of mech tech first. Slowly but steadily then, the War Queen is getting pommeled, the small war urchins leaving a trail of destroyed machinery behind her that will most likely end with the War Queen herself any moment now. And there we go, War Queen destroyed, we've got our first power focus chip, and about 20 Sightstealers still remaining. That should be a manageable number, I think, so let's hold open our door here and invite them in. We'll meet them with sharp claws, fire, and a whole lot of bullets. Apart from a few fire-related mental breaks, the fight is a rather uneventful affair. Eventually, the proximity detector stops blinking, and so I think the coast is clear. By the way, quick note here, I have installed the Better Hemogen Farm mod, so that I don't have to manually instruct the doctors to harvest hemogen from our slaves all the time. I'll add it to the mod list that you can find at the end of the episode's description. It doesn't really change much, it just adds this little gizmo here where we can essentially turn anyone into a hemogen farm, not just prisoners. So nothing the vanilla game does not already allow, only this way it's a bit less of a hassle. In the middle of a rather bright night out on the sea ice, our slave quarters are then finally equipped with the new fabrication bench, although before our slaves can go to work, Shireen here suffers an Entity Slayer mental break and also manages to outrun our ghouls on her way to our containment cells, and because I don't want a maniac to start chopping her with a monosword, we'll just have to arrest her, which does unfortunately break her slave status. In the meantime, colony leader Elpis buries the body of Ben, a cautionary tale that perhaps the void is still not fully understood. With Shireen safely back where she belongs, we will now also accept this waste pack dump quest right here. The two psycasts could be interesting for Elpis, even though we will first have to find a way for him to level up as a psycaster. Despite his already massive psychic sensitivity, he is still only at level 1. The waste packs then arrive, thankfully pretty far away from our base, and it's a lot, so we better find a storage solution soon. For now, however, we're going to make another baby. Maniac and Lauren already had Roman, now it's Ellie's and Vulek's turn. Just as Elpis extracts an ovum from his sister, Nazim also finds out more about the Twisted Obelisk. Apparently, it is capable of transforming flesh, hinting at a potential spawning of Fleshbeasts at full activity. For now, we unlock the ability to trigger it to cause random mutations in our pawns, and even though the one Ellie received was not necessarily bad, we might perhaps want to be cautious here. Full deactivation, meanwhile, requires more study, so let's get on with that, while Vulek fertilizes Ellie's ovum, and afterwards the embryo is placed in the growth vats. Outside temperatures, by the way, have risen quite a bit over the last few days, which actually now requires us to construct a cooler on the sea ice to keep all of our meat frozen. For the rest of the day, we then keep improving our slave quarters. Shireen will of course also be re-enslaved as soon as possible. The remains of the various mech and entity fights we had over the last few days are being disassembled and butchered, and early on the next morning, Shireen is indeed already back in our ranks. And with the slave quarters almost done, let's set our sights on the next building project here. For the first time in a long while, it is time to expand the base. Unfortunately, that expansion is quickly interrupted by 125 Shamblers, who are, however, not immediately attacking us. Instead, they will just wander through the area, and if we leave them be, they won't bother us. Well, we will certainly leave them be, at least initially, but how about we send another Diabolus pair their way, and while doing so, we might as well also set up another mech band antenna for the next War Queen. The mechs then arrive in a fairly good position, but still a bit too far away from the Shamblers to draw immediate attention, and while we could wait for the two groups to meet, that is risky, I think, as the mechs will sooner or later decide to attack us, so let's send out Vulek to cause a bit of chaos. The mechs, however, do not really seem to bite here, so let's try the Shamblers next. they are a bit less sophisticated in their ways and will surely react aggressively to being blasted with fire. And indeed, that seems to have worked. We haven't quite triggered the entire group here, but this should be enough for a nice onslaught, while Vulik quickly teleports away after suffering a few gunshot wounds. His sudden disappearance, however, seems to have confused the Shamblers a little bit, and so the initial attack here only involves a small handful of them. This might give the mechs a bit more of an advantage than anticipated, but I'm not too concerned yet. There are still plenty of Shamblers left, and again, dumping piles of melee enemies onto mechanoids is a great way to defeat them. Not so great, meanwhile, is the high-intensity psychic drone that now affects all male members of the colony, particularly tanking Elpis's mood, who, thanks to his high sensitivity, is now receiving a -87 mood penalty. The mechs, meanwhile, have moved on to the next group of Shamblers, this one looking like it might be able to take down the first Diabolus here, and if they don't, then there's always the backup. But indeed, Diabolus number 1 goes down. The remaining Shamblers in this group do not manage to defeat any more mechs, however, so those mechs are now moving on towards the rest. And while we keep building, the mechs keep falling. At this point, I'm fairly confident that they should be gone in just a moment. Now, the psychic drone is unfortunately still active, so to keep Elpis down, we'll sedate him and give him a bionic leg and arm, a procedure that all of our colonists will likely undergo sooner or later, but it just makes sense to have him be the one to go first. At this point, I can also finally reveal what our new room here is going to be, a fully equipped gene lab. In some ways, this might even be a place of worship for our people, so we are laying down some real expensive purple hex carpet here, just to give the room a nice feeling. All of the extra gene banks and processors will of course not be installed right away, but the design here should suffice even for some of the more advanced gene modifications we want to perform. Our attempt to pacify Elpis is then completely mistimed. Fresh off of his surgery, he can now walk again and immediately wants to kill Nightshade. Luckily, the ghoul police is nearby to put a stop to that, while also landing an accidental blow on poor little Roman. The next few hours then at least remain uneventful. Our gene temple, if you will, makes good progress, and on the next morning we send out a team of fighters to deal with the remaining Shamblers, about 30 or so. Not really a lot of firepower here, instead we bring plenty of melee fighters. Perhaps not the best choice, especially with Scorcher Tony blasting fire through their ranks. All of that is only a minor problem, however, compared to the toxic fallout that now strikes the sea ice. Luckily, our base is mostly roofed over already and pretty much self-sufficient, and for any outdoor activities we have our mechs, but still, if this lasts longer, then that could get very annoying. The fight against the Shamblers, meanwhile, a bit messier than I had expected, but at least the psychic drone comes to an end during it all, and eventually all enemies are defeated, and we can finally resume picking apart the remnants of last episode's mayhem. Speaking of mayhem, the next event then, a grand slave rebellion. Zamal and Shireen apparently not so happy despite our investments into their comfort, although the grand rebellion here is of course quickly put down. Still, perhaps we need to be a bit more conservative with where we allow these two to go in the future. For now, they're not going anywhere, except into the afterlife, if we don't tend to them quickly. And so, for the next few hours, we are looking at a rather sizable list of injuries in our colony, and we still have all of that toxic waste to dispose of. A set of cargo pods dropping a few fine meals onto us also does not really help the situation, but at least we get some form of plan going here, with Lauren making a few high explosive shells. Once we have 20 of those, we are placing a second psychic ritual spot outside here, and we're going to have Nazim provoke a pit gate. Why not Elpis? Well, because the goal here is to get the lowest possible ritual quality, as ritual quality directly affects the number of Fleshbeasts being summoned, and these will immediately be hostile to us, so we don't want to make things harder than necessary. At a duration of 6 hours for the ritual, we can also only hope that Nazim does not suffer too much from the toxic fallout raining down on him. Meanwhile, we detect a silver mining site that might be worth raiding, as well as these 2 gold ores here that actually both expire soon, but let's take things one step at a time. As you can see, Nazim finishes the ritual and toxic buildup remains minimal, and we also get incredibly lucky with the placement of this pit gate. It has spawned directly next to the toxic waste, and I swear I did not save scum here in any way whatsoever. Now, from this point on, we're on the clock, so we want to be quick with what comes next. Only 5 hours are left for Ellie to construct several IED traps here. Since the Fleshbeasts emerging from this pit gate will all immediately come after our base, we are also going to lay these traps in the direction of our base. The idea behind this is to hopefully get some of the bulb freaks and tri-spikes to split before they reach us, because if that only happens right outside our walls, then chances are extremely high that we get a large number of Fleshbeasts spawned behind our defenses, as this splitting mechanic just vaults them wherever it finds room. So, signal chip in hand and Ellie on the retreat, we now keep a close eye on what happens next. Let's see how many of our traps are actually getting triggered here. To be honest, it does not look good to get things started. Right, so that was underwhelming to say the least. Yes, we did trigger the traps, but most of the bulb freaks just wandered by. So, time for step 2 in the plan. Let's send out the skirmishing party. These guys will now shoot as many of the bulb freaks as possible to get them to split before they reach our defenses. We are also utilizing some flare packs here to stun the Fleshbeasts, just to buy us as much time as possible. Still, I have to admit, I have a bit of a bad feeling here. This is definitely more Fleshbeasts than I had expected, so this might get tricky. Still, for now, as you can see, we are making good progress, splitting up the big ones. But now begins the interesting part, where we need to keep track of several people at once, as Ellie, Elpis and Vulek will now all vault off in different directions, hopefully giving the rest of the group enough time to retreat. Unfortunately though, in Nightshade's case, that does not really work as intended. She already goes down as Ellie, Nazim and Lauren frantically run for the door. Now, the 3 of them do make it inside, albeit barely. As you can see, Nazim is down too now, and the fire that's about to surround him soon is not going to help. Elpis, meanwhile, is still on his feet, leading some of the Fleshbeasts away from our entry, soon to be joined by Vulek, who has successfully led a few of the Fleshbeasts around that small lake in the ice. Thanks to several long jumps, the 2 of them escape the horde of entities that is chasing them, while the fight near our front gate has devolved into a complete and utter mess. In hindsight, we really should have just tried to time this with the arrival of another War Queen or Diabolus. This is really quite a bit more than I had expected to deal with, and yes, I still like our chances of winning this, but I do not like our chances of doing so without any casualties. With Vulek then carelessly blasting fire all over the place, it might also be a good time to rescue Nazim. Lauren takes care of that here to avoid our anomaly researcher going down in flames. One more pawn at the brink of death is then Nightshade over here, who only has a few hours left to live. Thankfully, with another long jump, Elpis can vault over the remaining Fleshbeasts and go over there to coagulate. Using his last bits of hemogen, Vulek will do the same for Nazim, before he and Lauren then rejoin the fight. And well, that fight is thankfully in its final stages. Our entrance is on fire, half of our colonists are heavily injured, but I think it's safe to say we've won this, and I think we possess enough medical talent in our ranks here to not let anyone die after all. Which brings us then to the pit gate. Now, we're not going to explore it today, but we can already queue up the dumping down of toxic waste packs. Our lifter bots will most likely not get to this right away, which is partially also because some of them are heavily damaged too, but we're going to patch everyone up, people and robots. For now, however, I think we have reached a good point to make the cut. Bit of a messy end here, but we've got what we wanted, a new pit gate, and I'm already very much looking forward to finding out what lies beneath. We end things today then with some more fan art, this one from Penny Loveland, a reference to back in the day when we still stored our toxic waste together with our entities. Here we can see the polar bear Shambler, who's been with us since the very beginning of this series. And with that, let's wrap things up for today. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.